Jesus said to his disciples, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out their fault quietly. When you are alone together, if things escalate, tell them what you feel you need to say. Let it escalate privately and with witnesses. Only after trying to sort things out calmly and quietly and with due process do you get to go public. Jesus didn't have Twitter or TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook. He'd never heard of an online pylon. He had never been subtweeted. He had never had to read what the below-the-fold comments about him were like on the websites of the Jerusalem daily papers. He never witnessed online bullying, and no one in the world that he lived in could have imagined the world in which we now live. But then many of us here right now could never have imagined the world in which we now live, even a few years ago. And yet, it's also a world in which we can keep deep connection with friends from the past whom once we could easily have lost touch with. It's a world in which people can keep up with this congregation when they're prevented from being here by sickness or travel or circumstance. And it's a world in which we can care for other people far away from us deeply and share our love for others on a daily basis. And again, many could not have imagined the things that we can do for good these days, even a few years ago. Jesus is talking today about how we should live and how we should learn to live. Maybe there are some clues in what he has to say about how we should live in this very real world of modern-day complexity, as well as how to live in the world that he knew. One of the things that fascinates us as human beings is the idea of having superpowers. The stories that we tell children are full of, invisibility cloaks or telepathy devices or things that can transport us through time to any place at the flick of a transponder button. And not just children, superpowers are the stuff of many stories that adults enjoy too. The ability to fly or have X-ray vision or to understand all languages without going to any of the bother of learning them. Or the power to generate unconscious writing so that you can publish so many books without having to think for a minute about the content. Superpowers are often derived from how we imagine God to be, or maybe imagine gods to be, like us, only greater. And we long for those powers, long for them so much that they become bound up in our stories, our narratives. Well, when I was young, I remember that one of the superpowers that you could imagine being wonderful to possess was the power to know what everyone else was thinking. The power to be able to work out what everyone thought seemed to be a wonderful thing to wish for, a gift from the gods, or maybe a gift from God's own self. And technology is giving us powers that to our forebears or even to our younger selves was unimaginable. Well, my phone gives me the opportunity to know pretty much what everyone is thinking. If not everyone, an overwhelming number of people. And yes, sometimes I do feel empowered by that, but sometimes I also feel powerless in the face of the onslaught of opinion and fury. Fury that can be personal, but also seeps into our common life. It seeps into our politics, it seeps into national decision-making. That onslaught of opinion may be personal, may be threats or negative commentary about me or downright untruths, but it also becomes political too. For if you can share extremist views easily with many people, freely, well, then you must expect extremist views to be shared. So, what to do? I know that some people would like to just ban things and turn off that modern world, but I'm not convinced that genies do go back into bottles very easily. In our gospel today, we have the beginnings of learning how to live, whether we live in an occupied Middle Eastern land of conflict 2,000 years ago, or whether you're so online that you're already tweeting this sermon. Truly, I tell you, Jesus said, truly, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now, this is a notion that we speak about when we ordain priests. If you ever come to an ordination here in St. Mary's, and we do those from time to time, if it's a priestly ordination, you will hear those words spoken about binding and loosing. But the things that we ordain people with, they are derived from the gifts that we are given as the whole people of God. And that's true of all the ordinations that we have. We together have the power to bind and the power to loose. And those phrases are so unfamiliar that we can be tempted to just skip over them, but they actually really matter, for they give us clues as to how to be. To bind and to loose in the biblical tradition means being given the gift to discern right from wrong and to act on it. Binding means resisting and restraining the powers of sin, binding the spiritual forces that seek to hinder God's passion for all that is good. Loosing means having the privilege to forgive. Forgiveness is a privilege, extending grace and healing to all those who seek it. As the people of God, we are encouraged, well, no more than that. Not just encouraged, but commanded. We have a mandate from Jesus to resist evil and to do good. And yes, evil is as close as your nearest timeline. But God is as close to you as your latest breath. With that closeness comes the opportunity to bless this world. People sometimes think of the power to bind and loose as being magical powers bestowed at ordination on an exclusive body of people who sometimes don't seem to know how to use them. Well, priests do have a particular responsibility in this world to discern good from evil and to know when to pronounce forgiveness and to know when to bless. But like all the gifts of ordination, that responsibility is derived from a much, much bigger mandate. It is given much, much more widely. It is given to us, the people of God, from God directly. Behold, God says to us today, behold, I am giving you a superpower. I bestow upon you the ability to discern good from evil and to bless the world with love. So, if you are inspired by Jesus and his stories and his tales and his life, if you are someone who's inspired by him, who comes to this place looking for God's love, then that's a part of how you will discover that love. You have a superpower. The power to love as God has loved you. And the only question I have for you is, how will you use your superpower this week? In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.